is Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Inspiring and providing real insight to our listeners with every story. Exploring deep stories behind every guest. Please welcome your host, Beau Tiffany.
Hello, it's Robert. Thanks for coming back on today. How are you both?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you. Well, always fun.
We had such a great discussion last time, and so we're kind of going to pick up from there. Robert, do you kind of want to frame what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, in our last podcast, I was talking about some broad overviews to understand the toxic influences that are out there in our culture that come from the media, that come from politics, that come from people selling you things, and a host of other things. And Phyllis was addressing ways to understand those things and how to cope in this toxic environment on a more individual level with the kind of relationships as you have with family and friends and others, work relations, and how you can cope with these toxic things on a personal level. And I'm going to talk today about how you can understand these toxic things and thereby help yourself address them. And I think, Phyllis, you could speak for this, but you will be addressing specific strategies for personal level coping.
Yeah, and just to throw this in, part of what we were talking about also last time is how what we know from the individual level of what are healthy dynamics in a relationship and what are unhealthy, abusive, bordering on or becoming violent a dynamics in relationship can be applied to larger institutions, groups, family, businesses, and government outside of the individual realm, so that there's a correspondence between the individual and the collective that I think we really need to be aware of. And when we're looking at what are the things that help heal, what are the techniques, what are the skills, what are the attitudes, what are the positions people need to learn and take to heal broken and disruptive and violent human relations, that again, what we know on the individual level could be applied to the collective if we had the will to do that.
So folks, stay tuned, listen to every word, because we're about to drop some good nuggets on you today. Why don't we have you introduce us to this, Phyllis, because I believe, the way that you've written and structured things on your books might lend to a way to format this discussion today regarding these topics. Let's go from there.
Yeah. And there's, let me say I outlined several elements. I call them the elements of repair in my book, because these are some of the basic skills and attitudes and approaches we really help people employ when they're trying to work out difficult relationships. And we can start there, but and they're really important skills that I would love to see adopted on a larger level in our whole country and really in the world. But I also want to say that after that, there's some deeper cuts that I'd also love to go into, whether it's in today's podcast or another one. But I think that's a really good place to start. Do you want me to start sort of outlining some of those?
I think that would be great. Robert, do you have anything to add before?
No, I think it's a great place to start.
Okay. Well, one of the simple things that I learned in one of the couples therapy programs that I was a part of, just as a beginning of an approach when people are coming together to try to work out, high conflict, deep disagreement, disruption in their relationship, the possibility of ending it. But it could be on a continuum, just from not getting along to we're ready for a divorce. One of the beautiful ways to start the dialogue is to ask people to imagine that there's a bridge between them, and that right now they're on opposite sides of the bridge and they don't know how to cross over to each other. And so we just have people imagine before they even start talking that when one person is talking, the other person does everything they can to just cross over the bridge and enter that person's world. And knowing that when it's their turn to talk and express their views, that their partner or whoever it is going to make the same effort to cross over that bridge into their world and try to understand them better. And it's a beautiful symbol for, I think, what we need, not only in our families, but in places of business, any place where people work together, function together, and on the highest levels of government. What if that was the commitment, that when we sit down to talk, we may feel like the bridge is 10 miles long and we don't know how we're going to cross it, but we're actually going to commit to do that. And that commitment to try to find repair, even of the most disruptive, painful, hurting relations, is actually the basis for any skills that you're going to employ. So the first one, and so we teach people these skills. And of course, that's really hard to do, to cross over to the bridge to someone who you really are in deep disagreement with, or feel very hurt by, or extremely angry with. But that's what we're addressing, because that's what we're addressing in our nation as well, is where does anger take us? If we don't have a way to pull ourselves back and heal the relationship, it's very likely that it's going to take us to some form of violence, verbal violence, emotional violence, physical and sexual violence, war. So the stakes are high for implementing the things that we know work and can help, given again that we're all fragile, imperfect human beings, and we do our best and sometimes have to do it again and again. But one of the first elements that make it possible to even begin to repair, I call restraint. And that basically means you leave your weapons at the door. And most people, I've never actually had anyone come with a literal weapon to therapy, but we do come armed. We come armed with our anger. We come armed with our fear. We come armed with our need to retaliate. We come armed with thoughts of really assaulting the other person with our words when we're so angry. And so the first element, to make it safe, it has to be safe to talk. That's really the bottom line. People are not going to come together and work anything out if they don't feel safe. And so restraint is the big one. And that means that you don't threaten. It means that when you're really angry, you learn to tolerate your own distress and not just vent it on the other person. Even if it's like, with couples, it can be anything like just rolling your eyes and turning your head away. Obviously, on a national or community level, the need for restraint is greater than an attitude or a posture, but it all counts. If I'm trying to cross the bridge to you, I have to show you in some way that I'm willing to listen. And if I'm rolling my eyes and turning away, I'm not showing you that I'm willing to listen. So all of these things really, really matter. And sometimes people get into it and they do get really angry and they do shout. And what we really try to help people do is take a time out. If you really feel like you can't control your emotions in a way that is going to be constructive for a conversation, then take a time out and commit to come back. And these are like really simple things, and they're really hard to do when people are triggered and fired up. And so, for most people, like in an average therapy setting, okay, the consequence is your partner's mad at you because you yelled at them. But when we're talking about, community, local, state, and national relations and international relations, restraint means we put down our weapons. And I know that this is a really controversial issue, and we can come back to this. But I do think that on the big scale, if we're going to make it as a human race, and I really believe this, we've got to disarm. So that's a huge topic, and probably open to many, many points of view. Certainly not something that's going to happen overnight, but that's how the individual, goes right to the collective when we're talking about what are the elements of repair. So before I go on to anything else, I want you both to totally chime in.
Well, I think everything that you said was very thought-provoking. Robert, how do you see all that through the lens that you bring?
Well, I think that this is a very interesting podcast in the sense that we're coming at this problem, basically toxic behaviors in our lives, toxic influences, and how we cope with that, how we deal with that with the people around us. And Phyllis is coming at this from an entirely different perspective, which is the individual level. But in a sense, I am too. And what I'm going to do, which is going to parallel what she's doing, is I'm going to offer insights to the listeners about ways to understand and cope, and that will help you cope with all the toxic influences that surround us today. They're coming at us from everywhere, from all media, TV, the internet, from even sometimes from family and friends, and the person in line at the grocery store. And so if we keep certain things in mind, we can better understand the source and the objectives and the nature of these toxic influences, and be able to cope with strategies that protect our mental health and enable us to be happy and to understand and not be derailed by these influences. And so I've got about 9 different insights to share today. And but I'll wait for the first one until Lois has had a chance to respond to this and maybe take on her next topic.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Phyllis. Why do I keep calling you?
Oh, that's okay. I think we could all, talk about what the first one was if we want to. I'm happy for your input.
All right. We live in a world where we are, as we all know, we're immersed in sales pitches and information. And it's coming out from the internet and from everywhere, television, cable TV, Twitter, Instagram. And we need to first be sophisticated consumers of information. We got to remind ourselves constantly that all of this stuff is commercially generated. It's not peer reviewed. It's not university textbooks. But everything, all the sources of our information, just about all of them, are commercial enterprises. And they are fiercely competing with each other, seeking our eyeballs and ears in order to make advertising dollars off influencing us and our behaviors by getting us, to click, to buy, to vote, to act, to invest. And most of them use some level of threat or negativity. Why? Because that's what works. We talked about this in our last session, that our brains are hardwired in evolution to prioritize information that seems to pose a threat. Look, there's a saber-toothed tiger coming up the trail. We got to do something. And media of all types are quick to discover this earlier and how to exploit it and ways to make everything threaten and anger you, because studies show, hard evidence shows, that social media posts and ads that make people angry and feel threatened get them to do things. They vote, they donate, they click, they act, they buy. And so the mechanism we need to keep in mind that helps us understand this is that if we understand why they're doing this and what they're doing and it helps us be less threatened by it. We're going to feel less threatened generally if we just understand this is just so much sales pitch and noise. Okay. So now we're going to talk about some specific solutions. I'll mention one here. The first thing we all need to do all the time, which we're not doing so much as Americans, is we need to be critical thinkers. And we need to be savvy and skeptical. It's healthy. There's an old saying, as the old saying goes, don't believe everything you hear or read, okay? When you listen to a sales pitch or a political argument, always ask yourself, what would an informed, knowledgeable person on the other side of this claim or argument say to me to rebut this if they were here right now? And try to find that rebuttal or counter argument online if you need to. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Be deeply skeptical of any politically motivated TV or websites or cable news or social media or radio. Seek out authoritative rebuttals, independent, neutral resources. We have at our fingertips, our smartphones. I mean, this is the amazing thing, these smartphones, they have 100 times the Library of Congress right at our fingertips. Neutral sources. And you can go there And you can find all these incredible sources. You can go to the World Health Organization or the U.S. Surgeon General. There are websites for science and scientific journals, like the Journal of American Medical Association. And there are all kinds of websites. I just clicked on a list, and I just wanted to read it to you really quick. There's PolitiFact, factcheck.org, Washington Post Fact Checker, Snopes, S-N-O-P-E-S, that's the one that started out rebutting the old urban legends. There's the Stanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. They have a big fact-checking project. Sci-Fi, Fact Check, Media Bias Fact Check. It's called MBFQ. And there's NPR, good old-fashioned NPR has a fact check. And there are thousands of others, but those I just read to you, you can go online right now and find them, and they will give you highly objective expertise rebutting what I'm giving you the other side of all the arguments that are out there that might be troubling. So you want to go to those places and listen to that before you believe anything or do anything. So I'll pause here, Phyllis, and let you take a crack at any of those or some other points that you need to make on your side of what people need to do to protect themselves.
Because what I'm thinking, you know, from what you're saying, Robert, is that the elements of repair only work when, and they're hard to implement in any case, but they only work when there's a really strong motivation to actually repair a relationship and reconnect. And what you're bringing up is one of the things that, you know, you're talking about manipulation, basically. You're talking about, you know, finding ways to get people to buy or be influenced, but basically just to do your will, that has nothing to do with anybody's benefit except maybe the person who's doing the manipulating. So there's not really, in that context, the desire to manipulate others for gain, for power, for money, for influence, for sex, for just to have the feeling of domination, to, you know, displace them and take their resources, whatever the reason is. That I think that is one of the reasons why we don't come together to actually sit down and look at the elements of repair and do the hard work. And it's really hard work to repair a relationship, because you can't cross any kind of bridge that I'm talking about. That just sounds like pie in the sky. If your motivation is really not to resolve the deep issues that divide you and come back into relation and reconnection and care for one another. So I think maybe, you know, we're talking still about some of the reasons why we're not, as sometimes as individuals and certainly as a collective in this country, not committed to that repair process and the work that it would take and the vast changes that we would actually need to make. So I'll let you both chime in on that, and tell me what you think about that. I think it's a little early to jump into repair because we're still talking about some of the things that we need to identify and really call out, if we're even going to feel motivated to do that.
Sure.
Well,
Robert?
Well, you know, my insight here is that you know, the repair element you're talking about does require two people, just like it takes two people to go to therapy, and they both have to be committed to it. So you're talking about a different kind of dynamic there, and it's a very, very vital one and a very important insight, and it's really critical, and not enough gets said about it. And I don't think there's enough people who take advantage of the opportunities of therapy or even recognize they're there and what they could do for them. But what I'm speaking to is our strategies and understandings, insights that individuals need to come to or can come to that help them understand the negative influences that surround us and just thrust in toward us everywhere. And if you understand those negative influences and what's causing them and creating them, what their objectives, what they're trying to do to you and why, then you can step back and you can protect yourself from those toxic influences. And I'll talk more about how to do that. And that's a little different strategy. It's an important strategy to protect, because I think one of the reasons there's so much depression and so much anger out there today, and that has influencing the interpersonal relationships that come to you. But the reason people are angry and depressed in the first place is because of this extreme negativity and anger-inducing media that surrounds us. We're in a petri dish of hate that's around us. And it's very toxic for people. And if they understand it and they have these insights that I'm trying to share here, it will be less so. And I'm going to make the argument later here that actually things are pretty good. I mean, we do have our problems in society, but there's a lot of reasons for huge optimism about where we're going as a culture and about things that are going on. And individuals can take those to heart, understand the source of it, and just tune it out. And that's I'm going to give some insights about how to do that. But let me just make one quick retort to what Beau said about taking time out and to get health. And I think this probably speaks to your insights too, Phyllis. But I have a bunch of guys I go mountain climbing with, and a lot of them have these high-powered jobs with law firms and other things, and they work 90 hours a week, and they have families and everything, and they have a hard time doing that, like to pull themselves away from all this, and they can't get their head out of their phone. And so I work on them hard. I say, look, if you come with me, give me 72 hours in the wilderness and climb a mountain with me, and when you get back to your office, I promise you that you'll be so productive and you'll be so clear-headed that it will make up for the 3 days you are gone and then some. And they don't really believe me at first, but when they go with me and they do it and they come back and say, gosh, Robert, I couldn't believe it. You were right. For a week, I was smiling and super productive and organized and efficient and clear-headed. And it came from taking that time off that you just mentioned, Beau. So it is whether it's a walk in the park for an hour or what, especially outdoors. And there's a bunch of studies that show if you go out and walk in the woods, it's the Japanese call it forest bathing. It's healthy for you. And so back to Phyllis, you were going to say you were going to respond to that.
I was just going to say one quick thing, and that is you mentioned that what I was talking about was when, working with two people coming together and trying to resolve their divide. And I just wanted to add to that you can do this with one person. It doesn't have to happen with two people.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think this is really important because we need to know that individually we can all make a difference. Even if it doesn't feel like there's anybody in particular we have to work it out with in the moment, especially with some of these big issues. Like, I don't know how to work it out with the Supreme Court myself right now, right? But basically, what we work with on an individual level is I can change my part in any dynamic. If you goad me, if you bait me, if you attack me, or if you just look at me like, I'm stupid or I have nothing to say, I can still choose how I respond. I can work on my own sense of truth, my own self-esteem, my own part in this play that I really want to play, and tolerate the distress. Distress tolerance is a huge element in shifting the whole dynamic of whether it's individual or national. I can learn how to tolerate my own distress and choose how I want to be in relationship with you, whether it's I can keep my calm and just speak my truth, whether I say I really don't want to talk with you right now, I'll come back when you might be more open. Whatever it is I choose to do. But I think we need to know on a national and international level, there's not really any walking away. We're here together on this planet. And if we don't work it out, what is left for us? We have the weapons and the know-how and the psychological weapons, in addition to the nuclear weapons and the chemicals that we're using on the earth and the way we're destroying, some of our habitat, to wipe ourselves out. So there's no walking away. And to me, that is where we come back to the motivation. Like, like there's something really at stake here in my own life to work it out with the people that I interact with because I care and I want to have a quality of life. But on the larger levels, what's at stake is I think the future of the human race. And that's what I would really like to communicate, because if there's anything that's motivating, it's that, for our survival mechanism to come in and be willing to do something that we're not doing now to survive. I hope that's the motivation and not just like, a negative view of life. I think it's motivating. Let's make this earth and the human race habitable and fulfilling and nurturing for us, ourselves.
Well,
we have these
go ahead, Beau.
we have these divides, and I think oftentimes we don't know where to align ourselves. Seeing the forest through the trees. Sometimes, we've alluded to in this conversation, changing our perspective or the zoom lens that we're using on our binoculars and how we look at things. I think, when you're lost in the forest through the trees, it's real easy to get a grasp of where you are if you can see the forest from a drone per se flying overhead. Metaphorically, that distance, you can say, danger up ahead, or this is the path over here, or what have you. I think that creates a lot of frustration for people, and not knowing especially who to align with, because people tell us, oh, we represent one thing, and in reality they don't. I was watching this thing on mega churches and the power that they have over people, and the corruption, unfortunately, that also has walked hand in hand with a lot of these places, and the cover-ups. And it was just interesting to me. But on a societal level, people are, for whatever reason, there's sheep and there's shepherds. And Phyllis, you could break that down better, but we don't need to. The point of that is that the sheeple just want to know which way to go. Life's hard enough. I don't want to fall off the cliff. Just show me the path, and I'll follow everybody else. But if our shepherds are leading us off the cliff, and we're packed so close together that we can't, notice that we're falling off the cliff until we get to the very edge, it's a scramble then for your life. And I feel like that has some good metaphors to what's going on today. How do we see the forest of the trees? How do we identify who are Republicans, who are Democrats, what's a left, what's a right? Who do I align myself with? What are their values? What are their true values and true agendas? And I bring up this to hit it home a little bit and bring some practical. Hold on 1 second, I have somebody at my door. No, that's okay. Phyllis, so I had some cleaners that I didn't think were coming, and now they've shown up in between our podcasts. So can we just push pause on this and then pick up, because they're going to be scooting around and making noise, and I apologize.
Sure.
Wasn't planned. So
Somebody's there that's going to be making noise in your office, or
yeah, my cleaners came, so it's not on time. So it's in the middle of our podcast, so I'm just wondering if we can hit pause, because they're going to be all around cleaning.
And so when you say hit pause, are you saying do a different day, or what?
So either I could hit just pause on the recording, and we can pick this up in 45 minutes to an hour, if that works for you.
Let's do that, Lois, if that works for you. I cleared off this day, and I don't have many days coming in the future.
Fine with me. It's fine with me.
I apologize for this interruption. So I will reach out just as soon as they're done, and I'll try to get them out here quicker than normal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, right now what time is it? It's
2:33 my time.
2:30, and so shall we reconvene at 3:10? And
Yeah, that sounds good. About roughly that would be perfect for me.
Like, so for me, it would be 2:10. That
That's
sounds
2:10.
enough time for you, Beau?
All right, Robert, go ahead.
Okay. Lois and I have been coming at this fascinating problem from two different directions, both of which are essential. There's the personal dimension of how you cope with toxic people and toxic relationships in your personal life. And the other is how do you cope with them coming from the outside, from the top down, from the society we live in. And what I've been trying to do is to provide you, the listener, the viewer, with coping mechanisms for the behaviors and mechanisms that are coming in from the outside. And one of the things that Beau said and Phyllis has both said is that one coping mechanism is very healthy is to exercise our sovereignty as a person and just say no. You walk away from toxic influence, walk away from toxic relationships. That's not as easy as that might sound, but that's very healthy to engage in that and not play that game. And you can just turn off the TV. And this is the first essential step, but we as individuals have to understand this game. And I don't think most people do understand the game in terms of the media influences that are coming in from the outside. But we have to be able to understand that to find the truth. We've got to have the truth before we can vote right or step into the arena and deal with things like global threats like nuclear annihilation and climate threats, which are quite real. And we have to step way out of the personal realm to do this. But to solve those mega problems, we've got to have people have the tools to find the truth, which in many cases they don't right now. So what we've been talking about are these individual options. And I think viewers will find these to be healthy and useful to go into their personal environments and use those and have these strategies and insights. And I want to jump back into our main topic here, just span it just a bit as an example about misinformation and about the toxic influences around us. And it's a little off the exact topic, but the America and the world is awash in misinformation and disinformation. We all agree on that. But one particular arena that I have experienced in where it's particularly damaging to individuals is financial scams. And I know this because I was a consumer class action lawyer in California, and I represented millions of people and for 30 years. And one of the most gut-wrenching things that I had to ever do was to interact with elderly people, decent, kind people who had been swindled out of their life savings. I had grown men cry in my arms. I mean, their lives were destroyed. They did not have the money to pay for their medication. They couldn't pay their rent. Everything they had was lost. They were going to have to get some kind of a job at Walmart as a greeter or something. They couldn't afford their own medicines. And how'd that happen to them? Okay. The same way it happens to huge numbers of other Americans in the political arena and otherwise. According to the FBI, there are millions of Americans swindled. There are hundreds of billions of dollars every year that are swindled out of elderly people. The district attorney here in my county had me go to retirement homes to speak to people because it was such a problem. And so how does it happen? We Americans are a trusting people, too much so. And we do that without proper vetting. We're gullible. And we listen to scammers, and we're not sufficiently skeptical. We don't seek independent advice, which is everywhere. And we ignore the red flags that are festooned all over these fake scam investments. Act quickly, pay with gift cards. And the fact that the people pitching this are just these very kind, sweet voices on a telephone or some website, which is probably in outer Albania. And a lot of people mistakenly think that they can somehow get their money back if it wasn't true, and they lose their money. And there's nothing that is completely wrong. And I can tell you as a law firm that we only took one out of every 400 cases that came to us, these sad cases. That's because 399 of them, the person who took the money was not a real person. It was an internet phantom. It was a ghost. And neither I, the FBI, or any law enforcement, nobody can do anything to help you if you give your money to those people. It's got to be a brick and mortar business licensed by the NASD and the SEC right here in the United States, or else forget it. Okay. But the point of all this is that these about fake investments, they parallel fake political and fake medical and other nonsense claims on the social media and nonsense. And you listeners have to, and viewers have to protect yourself. You have to ask the hard, skeptical questions. You have to say no to the financial scammers, but you also have to say no to political and social nonsense. You know, P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute. And he also said, nobody ever died poor, underestimating the intelligence of the American people. Those are kind of hard things to hear, but I think we all know that on some level that they're true. And we can do something about it by being better investors, and by paying closer attention, by getting scientific advice, and protecting ourselves from this. And I think that we live in this amazing time now that's with science. Science put men on the moon, and in the past 200 years, it's raised 96% of the people in the world out of poverty. It's vanquished most diseases and misery that people live with for countless generations. Modern medicine saves hundreds of millions of children a year with vaccines. And it also cured many of the chronic conditions that have made our ancestors miserable since time immemorial. Like my wife recently had a hip replacement. She's jumping around like a 20-year-old, and she would have been hobbling around in pain as you know, for just 20 years ago. Science has largely vanquished witch doctors and witches and superstition that ruled the world for all time until recently. And it's largely, but sadly not completely, vanished these extremist positions. And science is now finding ways through fertilizer to feed the world, better crops. But there are still people today, right here in the United States, that will tell you that vaccines don't work, that climate change is a lie, and even that the earth is flat. We have to protect ourselves by not believing that and the similar things, and look at what science has done for humanity. It's just getting started. Put your faith there. Everything's going to be fine. Look and put your faith in science. So I'm ready to come back to pick up this topic here about options that we have to fix what's around us.
I'm going to just go back to the original premise of my book, because that's kind of what underlies for me the discussion of all the specifics. And that is that I see all the things that you're talking about, Robert, as mental health problems. Mentally healthy people don't scam other people. They don't steal from them. They don't lie. And so I see it as a mental health issue, whether it's on the individual level or community level or a business level or a large corporation level or a government level, that essentially what we're calling political issues and ideological issues are mental health issues. And, you know, I meant to have it in front of me and I forgot, but I looked up, and I might have said this before, but I looked up the word politics and political, and politics, the definition that I came across was something like the process by which we come to agreement about how we're going to run our social order. That's what politics is. It's not necessarily bad. It's what we bring to it. It's the mindset, the beliefs, and the agendas that we have, how we look at other people, what we think we're entitled to, what we think is justified and not justified, and a whole set of other, you know, elements that determine what our politics are. And what we sort of, so through that lens, what I'm saying is that a healthy citizenry is going to enact their politics with healthy dynamics that both honor the rights of the individual and the individual gifts and strengths of the individual, and address perhaps the difficulties that an individual might bring within the context of what's the good for the whole, and defining what the good of the whole is, obviously on the basis of some healthy look at what a family is all about. And so in my book, I did talk about these two things that I made up these words, but I think they really give a really good description. I talk about high-tech human relations and low-tech human relations. And what I'm calling healthy family dynamics are what I would describe as high-tech human relations. And I use those words very specifically, I mean, very intentionally, because we're interested in technology. And I think the technology that we haven't really developed is our human relations technology. And so basically the foundation of high-tech human relations, the way that I describe it is it's composed of love and care and cooperation, and not only tolerance of diversity, but celebration of diversity, honoring the gifts of diversity, providing for everyone, sharing. And there's probably things I'm leaving out here. Two of them though, are good boundaries, knowing where I end and you begin, so that it's my needs and our needs are both in the picture of a healthy family, and nonviolent conflict resolution. Those are some of the main elements of what I'm calling high-tech human relations. And low-tech human relations are the opposite. They're all the dynamics that you find in dysfunctional, neglectful, and abusive families: hatred, discrimination, alienation, lack of boundaries or overly rigid boundaries, not providing for everyone, and no commitment to nonviolence, whether it's sexual, physical, verbal, emotional, mental, whatever. And so those are the ways I distinguish them. And I think what we're looking at in our country is this severity of a mental health problem, that we've allowed low-tech human relations to be some of our governing principles, whether it's in our families, in our communities, in our houses of worship, or in our large corporations and institutions, and in our government. So I just want to keep representing that, because I think that that's my filter on how to understand what's going on.
I agree with that, and I think that the problem is that it was a study recently shows that Americans today know less than they've ever known today. Now, when you ask them questions about civics and about when was the American Revolution, was it before the Second World War, they don't know. They don't know anything about our government. We had a U.S. senator from Alabama get up in the Senate the other day and talk about the two branches of government. I mean, how does somebody get there? So I think that in terms of solutions, what we need to do, and I used to have this joking conversations with friends of mine back when I was in college about, things that we should really learn in college. It was always a joke, how to change your oil and how to open a bank account and other things like that. But we need to teach in schools and otherwise healthy family dynamics. It was the term you used, healthy,
Right.
healthy friend. We need to teach that because people don't know it. Here's how you behave. Here's how you're supposed to behave to each other, and here's why, and here's how to solve conflicts, and here's how to do restraint. You were talking about. I mean, those things would be very valuable to high school kids. I mean, it would really be useful. Okay. At the same time, we do that. We need to teach them critical thinking, okay? How do you find the truth? How do you go on the internet where there's 200 times the Library of Congress? How do you find the truth there? And it's there. It's easy to find it. All these objective, big institutional websites that will tell you in simple terms what's true or not true about this particular issue. We need to teach them to do that. I mean, the problem is interesting in that we kind of assume that it's low-educated people that and largely there are a lot of low-educated, low-information voters that are susceptible to stuff. But I had lawyers come to me who had been scammed into investing in the German war bonds, gold bonds. That scam, it got a lot of people. And I had to sit down with them and say, wait a minute, that this and this, and how can you? And it was really hard to get to that. They had been penetrated and listened to the stuff to such a degree. And when there were questions about it, I'd raise all these things. Here's 7 ways why it can't be true, and they would go call these guys, who knows where they were in China, whatever, and they would say, well, this lawyer friend of mine, he says A, B, and C. What about that? and then write down what their rebuttal was and come back and read it to me. So if people had better critical thinking skills, we would be better off as a society, all kinds of ways. And when the district attorney invited me to go to these nursing homes, the nurses would come to me and say, "You can't believe, the scammers on the phone to these people all the time, and they talk to them, they listen to them, and we have this terrible time trying to get them, tell them these guys are scammers. They sound so nice, but there's a complete absence of critical thinking skills, and it affects our politics as well. And so I think one of the places to start is to get people to understand where the truth is. It's in science. It's on the internet in these right places. And once they understand that, and they can reach for that when they have a question, at least that's the first step to the individual to immunize them from these toxic influences, what they get that they're susceptible to, and get them to vote in the correct fashion, which is the first political step that we as individuals can take. And it's the first and the necessary step to get the kind of changes that we're talking about, Phyllis, that they're so necessary, with the environment and all kinds of things, and to get in schools the things that we need to get about family dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% behind psychology being a foundation of education, and all of exactly that. What do you think, Beau?
Absolutely. They go hand in hand, and having the understanding is critical, especially at an early age. One of the things that I think about is we're talking about this is the current state of things. And, a lot of what we're talking about is the correlation between mental health and politics and the current state of the world, for that matter. Am I off on that, or is that a good analogy?
Go for it. Yeah.
So, if we're looking at it like that, there's potential causes, for mental health challenges. We have these increased stressors. Modern life often involves, multiple stressors, such as work, financial, and family issues, social media, and, this 24/7 news cycle can contribute to a lot of these feelings of stress and anxiety. We talked a little bit about finding the truth, and truth is somewhat subjective in some people's minds. But Robert would probably disagree with that, because he would say, no, the truth are the facts, but how do we get to the truth? And what are good sources? I think we touched on that in our last podcast, saying, obviously in every advanced civilization, there's, this group of people that steps up and speaks out. And, that's kind of where we are these days. We're making awareness for the issues, but we're in a societal change too right now. It used to be that minorities were minorities, but now minorities are becoming majorities. And as such, personal upbringings and beliefs and values are changing. When I was growing up and going to school and taking psychology courses, they talked a lot about how America was a melting pot of all these cultures. And, after the cheese starts to melt and really bind together, then it becomes that fondue that we're looking for, right? And that's kind of where we're at right now. So we have all these factors coming into play, and we could talk about a variety of angles, but number one is mental health. And I think what I want to have our listeners take away with is understanding things in a way that is understandable, seeing the forest through the trees. Because often we're not even understanding how to look at things these days. That's part of the tactics that they use. And the other is, once we gain a better perspective of things, then, truly what can we do to make those steps? And for most of us, it's going to be on a community-based level. But I also want to inspire community leaders and also people in politics that might come across this, that are representing or in Congress, what have you, that this needs to start with them too. And we're having a changing of the guard with this older generation that's really served 30, 40 years within their positions, and now age is taking them out, and they're being replaced, but with that comes new ideas. So how do we take advantage of this, Robert and Phyllis, in this current change of the guard, if you will, so that we can address some of these issues, and these people can look out for the better interest of us?
Well, I think that I'm passionately believe that the truth is not subjective. It's never been subjective. And I think I mentioned last time that I'm a great fan of Thales, Thales, who was a Greek philosopher was born in the 7th century BC, and he had this theory that we should frame explanations of the world around two things only: reason and logic, and evidence. Reason, logic being one, and evidence, facts, being the other. And that was later called philosophy with a capital P, and it served us very well. It's the foundation of science. And really, when you start going away from that and believing things for which there's no evidence, you're really heading into madness there. And so I think that we need to teach that better in school. We come from this tradition of capital P philosophy. There is truth, and 2 and 2 is 4. It's always been 4. It'll always be 4. And so there isn't these subjective things. Now, I'll give you an example of that. I think we touched on this last time, and that is the pollsters have shown that for decades, if you go out and ask people, how are things in your personal life? The great majority of people say pretty good. And they say it now, and they've said it pretty much the same for 40 years. And then you ask that same person, well, how are things going for the rest of the country? And they'll say, oh, horrible. We're going to hell in a tar paper gondola. I mean, it's just terrible for everybody. And that percentage has grown hugely in the last, especially since the pandemic started. People perceive through their media filter that things are terrible for people out there, and things are going terrible. But what that does, it shows you it quantifies the distortion factor of what people's perceived reality in their real personal lives is versus what they perceive to happening in other people's lives. And you see how that if everything is okay for everybody you ask that to, things are pretty good. But the media is distorting that so that people think that things are terrible for everyone else, and I see this really across the board in people having these views of things. And I'm going to do a podcast, stay tuned, on Digital Voices, about the reasons for optimism, and I've been doing research on this for some months, and I think that there's a great deal of things going on out there, have been going on for a long time, that give us much, much solid, scientific, rational, logical reasons to be extremely optimistic about what's going on in our society now and where we're going in the next 50, 100 years. And it's just not talked about. And there's a whole series of things that are going on that'll help us solve the climate crisis, from populations going down. All around the world, populations are going down. And populations are pollution. Every time you have a person, every time they go around, they move, they eat, they're consuming energy and polluting the world. Well, as they get less and less of them, that will solve problems. And we're having the dematerialization. It used to take 120 grams of aluminum for a beer can. Now it takes 10. And across the board, we're using less and less resources to do more and more. And there's a host of other developments going on. You could see what's the explosion in alternative energy, which I've been involved with. I mean, it won't be that long before the solar is the only source of propulsion for vehicles, and electrical power. And it's spreading every which way. And California's banned internal combustion engines, in 2035. So 2045, I'm sorry. So we'll see within a generation, we're going to see this vast change take place. Technology saved us from the overpopulation bomb that Malthus wrote about. That food was going up exponentially, the food growth, but food was going up linearly, but population exponentially. And so under his calculation, we would have all starved to death about 1985. And what happened was something that no one anticipated. technology came to the rescue. Birth control. Birth control saved us, saved the world. And there's a whole bunch of other things going on that are going to reduce world population and make it possible to, and also that are reducing climate problems. So a lot's going on. I'm going to have a lot to report. Stay tuned for that. But back to our thing here, that, you know, truth is science and reason and evidence. We need to teach that in the schools, along with, you know, when I was going to school, there was actually way back in the South in the 50s and 60s, and they taught people how to behave. They weren't ashamed of it. You know, they talked about what is a gentleman, how does he behave. They had this Southern notion of gentleman. It was very chauvinistic in some ways, but it was very chivalric. And very much, you look out for women. You're responsible for them. You never curse in front of a woman. You treat them up on a pedestal. You open doors for them. You protect them. As Sir Walter Raleigh, you take off your cloak, put it in the mud so they can walk over it. I mean, there was a whole different point. But there was with men, you're honorable with people. You treat others honorably. And I came away with a strong sense of that all my peers were taught ethics. I mean, they were taught how to behave. Kids don't know how to behave today. And so Phyllis and I will add that to our list here of things that need to be taught in schools that people are kind of squeamish about talking about today. But we could do this on a nonpartisan, non-political level, I think, of just saying, look, you know, how do you want to be treated? You know, isn't that the way you want to treat your friends? Or you want to always say please, and, you know, you don't bully, and all these things that really create the backdrop of these traumatized people who come into life full of anger, and they absorb this stuff going on in the media. And, you know, Phyllis and I were talking about this. I mean, there's a lot of hate now that moves all through the internet, every direction. And that hate is finding targets in maladjusted young men who are going out and committing mass murders. But they're also telling people, your enemies, your political enemies, not just people who disagree with you. There's people who are illegitimate. They don't deserve to be. They're trying to take the American way of life away from you. And they're coming for your guns and your Bible. So you have to do something. And there's this huge increase every year in the number of people who think that violence against your political adversaries is legitimate. And, you know, how long is that going to go on before we have real problems going on? And that's another thing to teach in schools. I you know, as a lawyer, I'm astonished that even the level of educated people in terms of their ability to, you know, not be victims of scams, but that scam concept is equally applicable to the political process and to all kinds of stuff being sold and pitched to people. That makes no sense. And if they go online and knew how to just go online and look at this vast source of objective information, I read the list of them earlier. You can go online and ask for websites about disinformation and misinformation. A whole bunch will come up. Look at the big name places, and you will find truth right there.
So if you don't mind, let me just interject, and then I'll toss this to Phyllis. You know, you said that, you know, for the vast majority of people, you know, they think people are doing pretty good. I think it depends on where you're from. With regarding economic prosperity in the U.S., you know, granted, it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but the wealth divide it's so greatly unevenly distributed that people don't quite understand that part of it. The top 1% of U.S. families earn on average 25 times what families on the bottom 99% do. That has a huge impact on, I mean, our middle class has shrunk. The average income for our middle class has shrunk quite substantially. You know, and so I don't know as if everybody is doing as great as you think, if depending on what side of the fence you're looking at and where you might be located.
If I could just comment on that, Beau, you know, what you're saying is true. Okay, there's this enormous concentration that's gone on in the last few years. It's concentrated wealth in this tiny number of people. But the public perception, the perception of people is not kept up with that. I mean, I read an article today that said the great majority of people in the United States think of themselves as middle class. Even the poor people think of themselves as middle class, and the rich people think of themselves as middle class. Everybody perceives themselves. And even those poor people who are in the bottom, you ask them how they're doing, they look over at their neighbor and the guy across the street, and they say, I'm doing good.
I appreciate that, but that's not the world I live in. That's not the community that I'm from. And I think that there's a huge disparity between most rural cities and towns than that of perhaps the capitals of each state, if you will. So, and I don't want to argue about that. I just thought that needed to be probably said for listeners, that are saying, but wait.
Right.
So there's also the idea of truth, and I believe the truth is the truth, but there is objective truth, which I think is what you're holding to, and then there's objective truth, and then there's subjective truth, and that subjective applies to areas like ethics and aesthetics and aspects of personal identity. And again, because we're in this melting pot that's starting to homogenize finally, that becomes a tricky area. So that's kind of what I wanted to just highlight, and I wanted to kind of hand this off to Phyllis for her thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was going to kind of talk about that too. I think there are different ways of looking at truth, and certainly you want the objective facts. You want to know how the engine runs, and you want to know, if there's a disease in the liver, you want to know what treats it and what caused it. But I think in terms of human relations, it's more complicated than that, just because reason isn't the only thing we run by. And people have beliefs about the facts, even about the facts. They have different varying beliefs. So I don't know what the best example is, but something that's on my mind is, the people who enslaved the Black people believed that they were entitled to do that. For them, that was a truth. They were entitled to make use of other human beings for their ends. And I think it goes along with a certain belief in might equals right, and other things, that there are inferior people and superior people. So that might not be a fact that science can prove, but these are things that people believe are the truth. And to the extent that they believe certain things that are the truth, that are inhumane, that are what I call low-tech human relations or abusive dynamics, they're running us. And a simple fact about that a Black person has the same bodily makeup as a white person isn't going to influence that, as far as I'm concerned. So I just feel like, and just to highlight something that Robert said about there's a lot of good news, I think one of the pieces of good news is that we're talking about mental health. I think one of the pieces of good news is that we're saying what's going on with us psychologically, that we're treating people the way that we do. And, to sort of highlight what you're talking about, Beau, about it looks different from different communities. I just saw this really powerful interview with a man who had been a Black man who had been knowingly falsely incarcerated for a murder they knew that he didn't do it, but they were just going to incarcerate a Black man for the murder. And he spent 30 years in jail. And there was this fantastic attorney who's committed his life to freeing people who are falsely incarcerated. And the podcast that I listened to of this man speaking of his experience, and both the lawyer and the man who had been recently freed, revealing, what they called the details of what they, I think, very rightfully called the industrial prison complex. Yeah, what was it? You know what I'm saying?
Industrial prison complex. Yeah.
Right. And how massive it is, and how targeting it is to Black people and people of color, and how much profit is involved in keeping people in prison, putting them in prison, keeping them in prison. So that, I think this is the underbelly of what we're looking at, and we need to look at it. And I think part of the good news that I think is the good news is that there is this search. There's a search for the truth in the sense of let's uncover this. Let's find out what's really going on here. Why is it that there's I think it's 6 times more people of color or Black people incarcerated than not? Than white people.
I love this. I just want to put down that I'd written an article on this just recently that I posted on our Digital Voices site. But it was with the focus of medical marijuana or marijuana legalization here in Wisconsin, as we are an island an island unto ourselves, and why that is, and how the prison industrial complex has a correlation to that as well. So I love what you're saying right now about this. I don't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to add that as a plug. And I'm really eager to hear what Robert has to say once you're done, Phyllis.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that we have to look at how we use what we call facts. Facts are absolutely important, but some people would say that's fine. These people are bad. They don't deserve to be free. And we can use them any way we want. And if we make a profit off it, great. And that's their truth. So that's what I would call a subjective truth. And for me, again, I'm probably going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think we have to come back and look at, is this mental health? And not only is it not mental health, in my point of view, to enslave people and to falsely incarcerate them. And he talked about all these stories about young Black men who stole $200 and they were sentenced to 70 years in jail. And one of the things he said was exactly what I said in my book, and which I really believe, is that there are probably very few people who need to be incarcerated. They're the people who we don't know how to treat, who we don't know how to help, control their behavior so that they wouldn't be a danger to others. And that the vast majority of people need help. They need help to have adequate resources, to have good jobs, to have adequate housing and medical care. He talked about there were 7 boroughs, I think, in New York. I think the man was from New York, where this vast majority of the prison population comes from. And they're all these very underprivileged, deprived, poor communities where there's no help. There's no resources, there's no help, there's no opportunity for young people. And so they turn to crime. And that's our responsibility as a society. That's where I see that is the responsibility of the family of America. We're creating the criminals that we then misuse. And it just breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart.
I agree with all of that, and I think that both back to our earlier discussion, I think that the disparity of income in our communities is huge. It's real, and it's behind what Phyllis is she's just talking about that. I mean, it's so huge that it interferes with intergenerational transfers of wealth. It interferes with Black people's ability to get in college, to get opportunity, and that puts them disproportionately in a track toward going to jail. And so it's all very important. What I was measuring, the other thing was people's misperceptions about their wealth. They tend to look around themselves and compare themselves with their neighbors when you ask them, how you doing? And not see themselves as they really are, which is, a tiny fraction of the wealth that's moved into the top 2%, which is where this gigantic amount of wealth is going. And it's a real problem, and it's contributing to all these other problems that Phyllis is just talking about. It's contributing to a lot of terrible things in America. And, there's all these interesting models that show that if you took wealth and you redistributed it, the whole country would be richer. I mean, everybody would make more money because you'd have all this. And what we're doing now, there's one social scientist came up with this idea called the realization rate, which is you take some poor kid out in the ghetto. What proportion of those people are able to go and fulfill their total potential to become doctors and lawyers and scientists and Nobel Prizes, that proportion, that is the realization rate. And our realization rate as a country is very low compared to Europe. You look at Denmark. Denmark, I think, is a country that has much to teach the United States. My niece goes to school there, and it was a country of herring fishermen and pig farmers 40 years ago. I was there 40 years ago a lot. My brother was there, and they decided, and they had a GDP of $10,000 a head. And they decided they were going to invest in themselves. And imagine what would happen if Russia, if Putin had done the same thing, So they started paying their kids to go to college, okay? Not free tuition, paying them. My niece gets $1,000 a month to go get this degree they want her to get. And so what happened after 40 years? The GDP soared to $68,000. It went up 18% a year. And they're going to soar past us right now. And our GDP is just a little over 70,000 GDP. And so they're right behind us, but they're gaining on us, and they're going to go soaring right past us in this decade because they invest in themselves, because they have this model of society, the one, Phyllis, you were talking about, that everybody needs to participate. We need to make opportunity available. The realization rate there is nearly 100%. Whoever you are, we're going to take care of you because you're Danish. There's a name for it there, Schifferschatten or something. That's a Danish word that means that we're all family, and they treat each other like family. And so as a result of that, they're doing better. If we did that here, we would have a soaring GDP because the rich would get richer because they have people to sell to rather than people to put in prison at $30,000 a year. And that would make an enormous difference. You have taxpayers versus inmates. So I agree with all that. Now back to the more interesting discussion.
I want to give. I would kick myself in the butt if I didn't toss this figure out, since we have some of the other ones. Here in Wisconsin, about 60% of our prison population is filled with nonviolent marijuana offenders, and that's a scandal. It is, and that's one of the things I just thought needed to be brought to light as we talk about this. It tosses a bit of my home into it, so I appreciate you guys letting me do that. Go ahead, Phyllis.
That's horrible.
I just wanted to say that some of the things that you're highlighting really were brought up in this talk that I heard. One of the things that the man who was recently released from prison said, that he said there's a vast amount of intelligence and expertise and talent and creativity in the prison. He said people are amazing what they can do there, the art they create, the things they write, just the intelligence that they have. And I think I totally agree with what you're saying, Robert. That's what I'm talking about. We need in this country is that we invest in our people. And I think the fact that we're willing to just lock people up and treat them as slaves, which is really what they are. I think we still live in a world of slavery in the United States, is a sign of our mental health issues. This is a mental health problem. This is a sick mental condition, or don't want to use that word. It's a sign of our mental illness that we would tolerate this, that we condone this, and that we're willing to profit off of it and not think twice about it. And so, that's where I'm coming from with it. I think I had something else to say, but it's slipped my mind.
Well,
so
I think you've touched on it. That disparity that Beau talked about. I mean, there it is, and it's not just prison population, which is horrid,
right?
But it's their incomes, like Beau was talking about. The fact that they have is such a disproportionately small amount of income is feeding that prison population.
100%. Yeah. So. Yeah, go ahead.
Beau, you got anything on that?
No, I think that's great. It's a lot of people aren't aware of the prison industrial complex, and really, what is America but a bunch of sub businesses that make up one conglomerate? I don't know if that's maybe the best way to phrase that, but I do see that there's all these businesses in place, that are set up underneath the federal government, and they have their own needs, wants, and desires that sometimes are are used to direct and influence where we're going as a nation.
Can I just throw one thing in before we
Yeah.
go on? Yeah, I
Yes.
think I just want to bring in the race issue because I think it's so huge and so difficult to address and so difficult to treat. But there's just an underlying, unresolved race issue in our country, and it's also, I think, built on a very strange perception, which I would call also a sign of our mental ill health. Because besides the Native Americans, all of us are immigrants to this country, all of us. And the Black people were forced to come here. They didn't come here of their own free will. And so this whole foundation, which I call so mentally disturbed, that there are the people who were here first and get to decide who else gets to be here, or that the people that come here later are unworthy, inferior, should go home, is so it's just mentally not well. I don't know how else to say it. I want to say crazy. And I saw this, I just have to share this because it was so profound for me. Do you know the program Finding Your Roots, where they trace people's ancestries?
Love it. Yeah, great program.
Well, I don't know if you saw the one which Angela Davis was the person whose ancestry was being researched. And it turned out that one of her close relatives, distant relatives, was anyway, there was a white man and a Black man that came together in her family. And the white man was a direct descendant of someone who came over on the Mayflower. So that's in her blood. And I thought the irony of the whole thing that we are doing about who's entitled to be here, and then fed by this racial divide. I mean, these are topics that I don't know the answer to. I just know that we have to sit down and look them in the face and really look at what we've done to other human beings in the name of who belongs here and who's superior. All of it. I don't have all the answers. I just know that if we could sit down and do that about race, and if we could sit down and put our heads together and really try to resolve our issues about men and women and the masculine and feminine, we might have a chance to survive on this planet.
Well, I suggest that we do that with these segments. And I think that we could pull that apart and really come up with some good insight on both the problem as well as the solution, both from a clinical side as well as through Robert's experience and lens of brilliance. Every time he opens his mouth, I'm always like, wow. I don't know, you too, for that matter, Phyllis. I wanted to kind of wrap this one up because we're getting a little bit on there. I think that what should we title this one?
Well, let's think about that and make some suggestions to you.
Well, and it might be a way to help us focus on how to end this, recap what we talked about and bring that into a
maybe the multi-dimensional search for truth, because it has many dimensions, and that's sort of what we're evolving around.
I like that too.
For truth and for solutions, for truth and solutions to our to our environment, the toxic aspects of our environment. But I just to end on a couple of comments you made, both which I resonated a lot with me, and what both you were saying, and that is talk about the prison profit complex or the prison industry complex, and I think one of the roots of evil, we talked about the racial disparities, and we've talked about income disparities being the root of a lot of things that drive the prison population. But one of the biggest roots of evil in America is Citizens United, which is this case that permits unaccountable political donations. And Congress finally, after struggling for decades and decades, passed this ordinance that limited federal statute to limit the amount of money that goes into political campaigns. And it was overturned by the Supreme Court 5-4. And I think it's the worst case that's ever been rendered. And it is unleashed this torrent of secret money that pours into politics, and it makes every kind of evil that's profitable. They give money to the politicians, and I can go on and on about that. What I've been working here with Civil Rights Alliance against the Pacific Gas Electric, big utility, and they just give all this money to these politicians, and they burn down cities and they kill people because of their negligence. And they've been convicted in court of homicide, and hundreds of people are burning down cities and gone bankrupt twice. And they put a federal judge in charge of it, a guy that I know, really good federal judge. And he said, this is an out of control criminal enterprise. It's got to be disbanded. But what happens? He keeps giving money to the politicians. They keep doing it. And so this is one of these problems that feeds into all the things we've all agreed is the source of problems. And that's kind of a meta problem. And one of the things I'd like to add on to the next discussion here is more this discussion about what truth is and where it comes from, how we define it. Thales and the British empiricists, a group that came along, and they said, let's define truth by talking about mathematics, which they call tautology, is the truth. 2 and 2 is 4. Okay, and there's empirical truth, which is science. And then there's metaphysics, which is like God is good, and really, there's no way to prove or disprove any of that. Whether a fetus is a life or not, that's a metaphysical question, and science has nothing to say about it. There's no way that you can really arbitrate that question at all.
I'd like to put in something here, Robert, as we,
all right,
because this is for next time that we're looking at this. So let's also try to figure out why objective truth is complicated by several factors like bias and perception, information quality, complexity, and also changing knowledge. What we know is true today might not be true tomorrow when, certain research is found or certain, new things come to light that we didn't know before. For the most part, I'm totally in agreement that, truth should be 2 + 2 = 4. But one of the things that I believe the media and the spin and the fake news, or that manipulating control or mechanism, is using bias and perception to twist truths, or twist those into a way that supports what they're saying. It's interesting if you say something out of context where you're not using the full context of what it was sent to, when you're just using a snippet, you can create a completely different idea. And I feel like that's one of the things that the media does often. So as we're trying to discern truth, we could take a look at those factors that complicate reaching it, because that awareness, I think, would go a long way too to help us identify the forest through the trees. Sorry to interrupt.
I think that these British empiricists came up with this framework for it that was talking about that really, really helps to clarify that. I mean, and when you're talking about ethics and art and values, metaphysics, there is no truth as we have been talking about it. It is utterly 100% subjective, always has been, always will be, because there's no way to arbitrate those questions whatsoever. Okay. And so what scientists have talked about as truth is empirical truth. And there's really not much that's confusing about that. I mean, there's, oxygen has a certain value, and you have 2 oxygen atoms, one hydrogen atom, it's water. I mean, the scientific truths are easy to find. A vaccine works or doesn't work based on double-blind tests. So you give it to 100 people, and 100 people get a placebo, and you compare the results, and that's empirical truth. It's really uncontroversial largely, but Lord, it doesn't help us a lot in these vast other arenas of values. I mean, science has nothing to offer us about values. It has nothing to offer us about metaphysics. Does God even exist? Is he good? It has nothing to say about it and can't. So, I think if we work with these frameworks, I think we can come to understand ways to talk about truth in ways that make sense to us, and where we acknowledge that truth is subjective and unknowable. and arbitrary, like in values, I mean, and, Bertrand Russell says, when you say murder is bad, what you're really saying is murder, boo. You're just expressing your own feelings about it. There's nothing in the universe that doesn't care, So anyway, I think that with these frameworks in mind, we go to work on these common things. And I think that these ethical these frameworks that the philosophers gave us are helpful in categorizing things in ways that we all understand, and that makes it clear how we talk about them in a sort of coherent way that we all understand and we all agree about, Your values are as good as mine.
Phyllis?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that empirical truth and reason will not resolve a relationship. They're needed, but they won't resolve a relationship. We have to work with the other parts of our human experience, which are our values, which are our conditioning, which is a huge part of it, and the things we've come to believe, and the coping mechanisms we've adopted, and our worldview of what we expect from other people and what we expect from ourselves. I mean, the list goes on and on. What's acceptable behavior? What's not? How should men and women treat each other? I mean, we could just make 100 columns here. And so we need the empirical, we need the science, and we need what I'm going to call high-tech human relations to deal with all the rest of our human experience, which determines how we relate to each other, which determines, are we safe for one another? Are we creating a safe world that will be sustainable?
I love it. I think that's a
good spot there.
Yeah, it's a great spot.
It's a great spot. You're absolutely right. The ethics and those values you were talking about are things that, if we understand these distinctions, science has a lot to offer, and it can help us in many ways if we understand what it can do and what it can't do. And what it can't do is it can't do, like what you were saying, it can't go in and solve these human problems, which are going to be our problem. And that is an essential part of all the puzzle we're trying to get our hands around here.
Right. Yeah.
Folks, listeners, I hope you're as appreciative as I am to have these great minds here on Digital Voices talking about these issues. I thank you both for your time for this insightful podcast, and I look forward to our next ones. Until then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Always fun.
This has been Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany, exploring deep stories from real-life guests with real-life experiences, providing insight to our listeners with every story. Stay up to date on future podcasts by bookmarking Digital Voices with BeauTiffany.podbean.com and follow Beau on social media by searching Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Have an idea for a future story? Send your idea to acrmadison@gmail.com. Until next time, grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.